Good morning, guys. Got a new desktop, not a desktop, but a little transportable, I forgot what they call it. Gosh, it's a computer, obviously, but smaller, not a big old thing. But anyway, here we're going to go into chapter 13. So we're on page 477, and we're going to do 13 today. And I've already sent you, I believe, a document on 13 and 14. I'm going to add a little bit to that. So make sure that when you watch this, you fill in some of the material that I'm giving you. So as you look on page 477, you see module 13.1 and overview of the peripheral nervous system. We've just come out of the central nervous system. So we're going to look at the peripheral at this point. A lot of organization, but you can handle it. So as you look down at the bottom of page 477, you see the last couple of sentences. It talks about the PNS, links the CNS to the body and the environment. Okay? PNS links the CNS to the body and to the environment. And you see it says the PNS does this first by detecting sensory stimuli and delivering information to the CNS, that's sensory input. And so the CNS processes what it picks up in the environment. For instance, it's 71.5 degrees in my office. That's very comfortable for me. But I've got a friend, if it's not 90 degrees, that guy is cold. He's very uncomfortable. That's just the way we're made. But my body perceives, my receptors perceive the 71.5, and that's comfortable for me. It goes up to here, comes back out, and I'm comfortable. If he were in here, he would be shivering to get his body temperature up. So that's what happens sometimes. But anyway, the sensory portion of the PNS picks up the stimuli in the environment or maybe in our body, sends it to the central nervous system, and then there's a response through the motor neurons that go out. You can see a picture of this on page 478, figure 13.1, and they show you vision here. That's a sensory, goes to your brain. You perceive what you're seeing and you respond to it. You can perhaps go out to supper tonight, and let's say you go to Mi Tierra and you can smell all the Mexican food cooking. Well, the sensory of the portion of the PNS is picking up on the fragrances there, the aromas, goes into your brain, it comes back out. Next thing you know, you're salivating. You're getting ready to enjoy a meal. So, got the picture? That's what the PNS does. It receives, but it also takes messages back out from the CNS so that we respond to the environment. So in figure 13.1, they give you some examples. Some of them we don't control consciously, as you see, as you come down to the bottom half where it says visceral sensory, like when your bladder's full. And then you don't really control your bladder. Your bladder is under the control of the parasympathetic nervous system, which we'll get into in a little bit. But you do have a sphincter that you can control. So you start looking for a bathroom so you can go relieve yourself. Anyway, I want you to read this sensory division portion in the second column. It goes over to 479. So you've got a somatic sensory. That's muscles that we can contract and control. Then you see over on page 479 the visceral sensory. You and I don't have any control over that. That's going to be associated with the autonomic nervous system in just a few minutes. So we've got those two divisions there in the sensory division, somatic and visceral. Then you come down to the motor division. And of course, that's the neurons that carry messages out of the body so that we respond to a situation. So you have the somatic motor division, voluntary control, muscles and so forth. Then you come to the visceral motor division, and you notice they call it the autonomic nervous system. Don't call it the automatic nervous system, okay? So you can read, I want you to read down through the visceral motor division called the autonomic nervous system. You'll get in there and you'll see that you'll have a division there in what we call sympathetic nervous system and the parasympathetic nervous system. They have some common names for those two systems. Sympathetic sounds like, oh, I hurt with you, right? Or whatever. It's not quite like that. But you see underneath the bold print term of sympathetic nervous system and parasympathetic nervous system, you see the fight or flight. That's what the sympathetic nervous system is often concerned with, getting us out of danger. So we respond to a dangerous situation, and the sympathetic nervous system is involved in that. Sometimes it gives us great strength. Sometimes it gives us great speed to move out of the way of something. The other division, parasympathetic, if you, let's see, it's down here somewhere. It's called, yes, in the last 4 lines, it calls the parasympathetic nervous system the rest and digest division. So when you and I go to sleep at night, or when we're through with a meal and maybe we're sitting in the den or something like that, we're reading. I'm reading a couple of good books right now, in addition to this book, which is just amazing to me. I thoroughly enjoy it. We tend to rest and digest. So the parasympathetic sort of opposes the sympathetic system. They try to keep a balance. What is the balance on the inside of our body called? Homeostasis. So they tend to try to make things even. Keep it on an even keel. All right, so much for that. So you want to read that and make sure you know it. If you come to the right over on page 479, second column, you come down to spinal nerves. Now go back to page 451 and review that information on the spinal cord and the spinal nerves. You remember you got a posterior root, then you got a ventral root and so forth. Got a posterior horn, ventral horn. The lateral horn is concerned with the autonomic nervous system. The posterior and the inferior horns, go back and look at those pictures. They're associated with the somatic aspect of the nervous system. But you see, you want to review those spinal nerves, the structure. Okay. Back on page 451, figure 1224. And then we have cranial nerves, which attach to the brain and mainly innervate this area up above our shoulders, which we would call the neck and the head. Notice the last sentence, 12 pairs of cranial nerves. So you want to remember that. You're going to find out you got 31 pairs of spinal nerves. Now, as you look on the next page, on page 480, you see the spinal cord, and you see the posterior root and the anterior root and the posterior root ganglion. Make sure you know that illustration. And you see the two come together. The posterior root goes through the ganglion, the ventral root goes through does not go through the ganglion, but they join into what we call a spinal nerve. Now you've got the posterior root is sensory, the ventral root is motor. So when they come together, we have a mixed nerve. Spinal nerves are mixed nerves. Now I want you to notice the labeling of the nerve down below. You're going to see terms that are going to remind you of the makeup of a muscle. in terms of connective tissue coverings. They just changed the terms a little bit. Instead of an epimysium, you have an epineurium. Now, what you're looking at, there's a cross section of a nerve. Now, not just one neuron, but a nerve, which is a collection of neurons. And you see the epineurium, and then you see these fascicles. Remember that back in the muscle? Fascicles, and they consist of myelinated and unmyelinated neurons. Those are single cells. It's like myocytes are single muscle cells. So you see the perineurium surrounds a bundle of those myelinated and unmyelinated neurons. And then you come down over to the right, you see endoneurium. Remember the endomysium, perimysium? Okay, so it's very similar. Should be pretty easy for you to put that together. The endoneurium looks like it's pointing toward the myelin sheath, and it is in a sense, but there is actually a connective tissue around the neuron, around the myelin sheath, around the unmyelinated neuron. Okay? So some terminology that's very similar to what we covered back in the muscles. So you want to know that and be able to identify that and explain what that is. So if you say, what's a perineurium? Well, it's a connective tissue that bundles groups of neurons. Okay. Let's go over to page 481. And on page 481, you see module 13.2, the cranial nerves. Now you look under learning outcomes, and you always want to look at that because that's going to focus you on what you're supposed to know. But we're not going to know everything about it, okay? There's quite a bit here, but it gets deeper, and we don't need to go that deep. What we want to do is identify the cranial nerves by name and number, and they have done that for you. If you look down below at the bottom of the first column, you see number 1, and they use these Roman numerals for that. That's fine. Number 1 is olfactory. Number 2, optic. Number 3, oculomotor. Now, I want you to know them by number. We got 12 cranial nerves. And some of them are sensory, some of them are a combination of sensory and motor. But we're just going to learn a function, one function for each of the 12 cranial nerves. So you want to know them in numerical order. And what you can do is just write out beside, as you see at the bottom, olfactory. That's our sense of smell. Optic, our ability to see an image. You come down to oculomotor and trochlear, that's 3 and 4. Those are nerves that they're motor nerves. You don't have to know that, but they innervate, they cause the eye to move. So when you move your eyes up and down and to the left and right and so forth, they're involved in that. If you look at the top of the next column, you see abducens, that's number 6. That moves the eye also. It doesn't seem to give you that understanding about that, kind of like trochlear. Trochlea is a pulley, and we have a little pulley through which a muscle goes. It's really interesting. And it attaches to the eye, and it enables the eye to move in certain ways. All you need to know is that the oculomotor, the trochlear, and the abducens are involved with the movement of the eyeball. Now 5, go back down to the bottom of the page, the column, you see trigeminal, and that is involved with chewing and swallowing. So the movement of our jaw, mastication, when we put something in there, want to crush it all up so that we can swallow it and get it down to our stomach. When you come over to facial on the second column, muscles of the face, smiling, frowning, and so forth, those muscles that we have under our skin are innervated by the facial nerve. And let's see, vestibulocochlear, that's number 8. That is concerned with our balance and our hearing. And the structures that are picking up on sound and movement of the head and the body and so forth are at the end of this canal. There's a membrane down there. The ear is an amazing organ. We know sound goes down there and it hits a little drum-like structure, a little tympanum. Then you got the little bones in there, and then you have the cochlea and you have the vestibular apparatus. Cochlea is concerned with transmitting sound energy into electrochemical energy, and then it goes to a part of our temporal lobe, and we interpret what we hear. Is it a dog barking? Is it a hawk screeching or whatever? And then the vestibular apparatus is connected there also. And so we have our sense of balance. So number 8 deals with hearing and balance. Glossopharyngeal, obviously it deals with your pharynx. Glosso is tongue. Okay? Helps you move your tongue. Vagus. The vagus is involved with the muscles of the larynx and the posterior pharynx. It's got other things too, but that's all you need to know. And then you come down to the accessory, which goes over, if you look over on page, let's see, where is it? If you look on page 482. Accessory number 11 goes down to your neck and your shoulders. So it goes to these muscles up here, trapezius and so forth, these various muscles that help us hold our head erect. And then the 12th one, hypoglossal. Hypo means under, gloss means tongue. Okay? So that's what you need to know in terms of the 12 cranial nerves. Don't worry about so much if they're sensory or motor. Just know the function and know the number. Now we're going to scoot over to, let's see, page 491. Page 491. And you see in the first column it says structure of spinal nerves and spinal nerve plexuses. We're not going to get into this very deeply, just very superficially. If you get to working with a neurosurgeon, you will get trained like you need to be trained. Come down to the 1 to 3rd paragraph on page 491, and you see it says we have 31 pairs of spinal nerves. We break that into categories of where those nerves go. So you see, it says in the first sentence that the 31 pairs of spinal nerves consist of 8 cervical, so they come off in the neck, C1 through C8. 12 pairs of thoracic spinal nerves. And then you have 5 pairs each, 5 pairs of lumbar nerves, and 5 pairs of sacral nerves. So they got nerves coming off in the lumbar region, got nerves coming off in the sacrum. You remember that's the posterior portion of your pelvis. And then you see it says one tiny pair of coccygeal nerves. And we're not going to get into all the things that they innervate. It's interesting, complicated. Now, there's a bold print term here in this paragraph. And you see it says nerve plexuses. Look to the left where it says complicated looking networks of nerves. Let's look over on page 492, just to give you a picture of what a nerve plexus looks like. Here is the cervical plexus on page 492. Don't go memorize it, all right? Just look at it. You would think nerves would come off one at a time, wouldn't you? And they would all be separate. It ain't so. It's different all the way down. So as you look at the cervical plexus, you can see the hypoglossal nerve up there at the top. And then here comes C1 and C2. And here comes C3. And then you've got these branches that join with each other. And you have these loops and so forth. That's a nerve plexus. So when they, back on page 491, say a complicated looking network of nerves where they connect with each other, that is a nerve plexus. Put your head wheels moving and write down a little definition for it. That's what a plexus is, a nerve plexus. Now, still on page 491, underneath where it says nerve plexus, the axons of each spinal nerves cross over one another to enter different plexus branches. See, that's where the complication, it's not really a complication, it just gets complex. We try and figure out, well, where is it going? What's it connected to? What's it going to innervate and so forth? Look at the last 3 lines of that paragraph. These plexuses, this works to our advantage as it means that injury to one spinal nerve does not completely cut off motor or sensory innervation to a body part. So we're keeping it pretty simple. Nerve plexus is a complicated network of nerves where they connect with each other and go out and innervate various parts of the body. So if little damage occurs in one part, it doesn't mean the whole thing's shot. Okay? That's all you need to know about nerve plexuses. Now we're going to scoot over to page 497. Page 497, figure 13.9. And what I want you to know here is you look at this person's posterior leg and buttock. You see where the pelvis is, and you see this big nerve coming out called the sciatic nerve. That is the longest nerve in the body. If you will look at the chart, you see under nerve roots, it says S1 through S. Boy, it's a tiny little word. What is that? 3. Boy, tiny little letters there. For me, maybe not for you. But notice the function, sensory to the skin of the posterior thigh. So sometimes people talk about pain down the sciatic nerve, and it's called sciatica. Probably got a disc that's bulging, and it might be putting pressure on that nerve, and it feels, and your thigh hurts. Anyway, that's the longest nerve in the body. Let's go over to page 500. Page 500, and you see in the second column, classification of sensory receptors. Now, this little thing here has a receptor. It can pick up waves. That's amazing to me. I guess those things just go through your head and so forth. I don't know, but anyway, it can pick up the waves of energy that carry a message to this little phone. And so you have a receptor that gets that. There's also a receptor that is able to transfer it to sound so that we can hear the message. Well, we've got receptors all through our body. And so when you look in this second column, I want you to know these receptors. Mechanoreceptors, they're concerned with touch. Feel some little bug crawling on you, or somebody shakes your hand a little bit too firmly or whatever. That's a mechanoreceptor that picks up the pressure or movement of air or whatever. Or even stretch, as you see the word underneath there. You can feel it all the way up here. You can feel it stretch. That's not good, not good. Okay. So you got a receptor. That's a mechanoreceptor that does that. Obviously, the thermoreceptors are for the temperature in our body. So chemoreceptors, right there. Tongue, nose, okay. That's where we pick up chemical substances, and we learn what smells good and what is dangerous to smell. Some of you have probably cut up onions. It makes your eyes water. You can smell it up in your nose and your eyes water. So we've got these chemoreceptors here, but we also have some others. If you come down in that paragraph, you see there are receptors that measure the pH, the concentration of hydrogen ions, the levels of carbon dioxide, the levels of oxygen. And the reason we have those receptors is because they warn us that we don't have enough oxygen, or that we have too much CO2 in our body and we start to ventilate more rapidly and perhaps more deeply. Those are chemoreceptors. Isn't that amazing? From one cell, you get all these cells, skin cells and so forth. Then you get muscle cells, then you got nerve cells, then you got receptors. How in the world do those cells know to become receptors? That's why I'm here. I'm always amazed at it. I'm just amazed at it. Photoreceptors, obviously they're here in the back of our eye. The whole tissue, we call it the retina, but you have rods and cones. Just fascinating. Fascinating. And they transfer that message back to the occipital lobe so that we can interpret what we see. Nociceptors are concerned with pain. Yep, they're concerned with pain. And mark that. Okay? Or as it says, noxious stimuli, which might be some kind of smell, some sort of gas or whatever. You say, let's get out of here. We got a gas leak. Okay? So those are concerned with the peripheral nervous system. Let's go over to page 504. Page 504, it's got this green, blue, purple, gold kind of guy. And you see all these little lines drawn on the body? Well, we have found out, and we don't necessarily have it all together yet, but we can help people sometimes figure out what the problem is. We found that these nerves that come off innervate certain areas of our body on the outside. If you look at the first sentence, it says the skin can be divided into different segments called dermatomes, based on the spinal nerve that supplies the region with somatic sensation. So when you have a pain, for instance, I had a nerve that was being pinched up here, and I could feel in a certain part of my body and that there was pain there. And that told me that a certain nerve was being pinched. I've got bulging discs in my neck. It's one of the joys of older life sometimes. So anyway, as you come down to the next sentence, it says that the dermatomes can be combined and assembled in dermatomes into a dermatome map, which is what we're looking at, that represents all of the spinal nerves. Keep going. The map can be used clinically to test the integrity of the sensory pathway to different parts of the body. So those who study this, and a lot of times general practitioners do, and there's a certain pain in your body that sometimes they'll trace it right back to some aspect of the vertebral column and the spinal cord and the little discs that are in between there. I think you had to study that in the lab. And you can get a bulging disc or whatever, and that tells them where to look for the problem, just by knowing the dermatomes. So you want to know about those. And I want you to come to the next paragraph. It says many spinal nerves carry somatic and visceral neurons to visceral, so visceral sensations travel along the same path as do the somatic sensations. This anatomical arrangement has a curious consequence known as referred pain, whereby pain that originates in an organ is perceived on the surface, cutaneous surface of the body. If you will look at the bottom picture, figure 13.5b, look at the left image of the person, the man, and look at his left, which is going to be on your right, his left, and you see over the chest, down the inside of the arm to the little finger, and even right in the center anterior portion of the throat. When it hurts there, when there's pain there, that could indicate that we have heart problems. Look at the image on the right, and you see it's the dorsal surface. Look up there at the back of the neck where it joins the shoulder, and you see you could have pain back there. So that's how they often figure out, yeah, this guy's got some sort of problem going on with the heart. We tend to think of it as being on the surface, but it could indicate visceral problems. So you want to know the heart. And over on the right-hand side, on the right image, the dorsal image of the person, check off kidney and check off liver and gallbladder. Isn't that interesting that your liver and your gallbladder can produce pain on the right side of your body, but they might not be up as high on that shoulder blade as the liver's just not that high up. Okay, so that's referred pain. So you want to understand that. Now, we're getting close to the end. Let's see, is there one other thing I wanted to cover? Yes, there's one other thing I wanted to cover. You can see how we're skipping a lot of stuff. Aren't you glad? Yeah, it gets deep. Page 508, Module 13.6. What I'm interested in you knowing there is down at the bottom of the first column where you see reflex arcs. As you come down to line, let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, line 4. That's a pretty good definition of what a reflex is. It's a programmed automatic response to certain stimuli. Okay, whether it be shut your eye or turn your head or whatever, there are all kinds of reflexes in the body. You probably have had a physical. You had one when you were first born. They checked things out. But one of the things they check a lot of times is you go in for a physical, they'll take a little rubber hammer and they'll hit the patellar tendon. You got a patella on the front of your knee, called a kneecap there. And they'll just tap it as you sit on the table and your foot flies up. Your foot flies up. Because what they've done is they've overstretched the patellar tendon, and so your leg is attempting to reduce that stretch. That's a reflex. We've got a lot of reflexes. Don't even have to think about them. Probably you've had these little mosquitoes come in. You do something like that, or try and grab that mosquito and turn it into a compressed object, right? Anyway, you look in the second column and you can see the components of a reflex arc. You have to have a sensory portion. That's the afferent that takes the message to the central nervous system. And the central nervous system is the second component. Could be the brain, could be the spinal cord. And then you see there's a response, the motor or the efferent division. It sends a message back so that you respond in an appropriate manner. So that's what we want to know about reflexes. And there's a nice little reflex picture over on page 513. But that's the end of chapter 13. So we have one more chapter. I'll probably be working on that maybe this afternoon or maybe tomorrow morning or whatever. And that will be the last, 12, 13, 14 will be the last bit of information for test number 5. Not test number 5 is not this week. Everybody hear that? Not this week, but next Thursday, which would be the 6th of August. So the 5th test will be the 6th of August. And of course, you know how we set it up. Thursday morning, 8 o'clock, till Saturday evening, 6 o'clock. And then I believe it's on Monday, August the 10th. Let's see, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. That's right. It's the 10th, that's when you'll have your final exam. Okay. Now you know where I am if you need to shoot me an email. Y'all have a good day. Bye.